All right, so Sam just did a countdown and now my anxiety is spiked, which is ironic because today we are talking about anxiety. And we've talked about anxiety a few times before. So I just want to kind of tell you and explain why we're talking about it again today. So my anxiety lately has just been kind of atrocious, and we wanted to talk about it in the context of COVID and also in the context of I've had a lot of things happen to me recently, whereas my loved one is in the hospital during COVID times, which is stressful. And also, Sam and I are very busy with our businesses this month, which adds anxiety just because of the busyness.
You moved somewhat recently.
Yeah, right? In August I moved, so like now we're starting to get settled, which is nice. But yeah, you're right. There's still like I need to buy brand new Christmas decorations, and I want this painting to go here, or I don't like this painting here, and it's like, yeah, it's getting settled in a new place. So yeah, just the holidays here. Christmas was just canceled in Quebec, so we're not allowed to gather with our loved ones. That adds anxiety as well. So
I don't want to make too light of that, Alyssa, but it just reminds me of is that from the Grinch Who Stole Christmas? Like the Grinch canceled Christmas. Are you familiar with the Grinch?
Yes, I love the Grinch. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Such a good call. Our premiere is the Grinch. But he's the Grinch who's trying to keep us all healthy and safe. So there's that. So we thought we would start off by explaining to you guys just some really basic definitions of what anxiety is that we found. And then we're going to dive into our experiences with anxiety a little bit more. So Sam, what's your definition that you found for anxiety?
Mine is not a very traditional definition, nor is it super simple. I can go first if you want me to, but
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I am kind of taking this definition or understanding or framing from the book How Emotions Are Made, which I am completely obsessed with. One day I will not be obsessed with it anymore. But
look at all those Post-its and tabs and colors. Right?
So much underlining and writing in the margin. Anyway, yeah, I really like this definition or this framing of anxiety kind of changed the way that I typically understand it on a day-to-day basis. So first I need to say that back in the late 1990s, neuroscientists discovered that the main mode for all mental activity is something called simulation, which is they basically from the Matrix. Not really, not exactly, but it means that our brains are predictive, not reactive, and that we are kind of our brains are simulating what is going on in the world around us and even what the sensations in our body mean. So making guesses as to is that thing over there a snake, or is it a leaf blowing in the wind, or whatever. And then we take in information from the outside world and compare it to our prediction. And this all happens so quickly, we're not conscious of it in the slightest. We have no idea it's happening. When we get that information from the outside world, then we use that information, compare it to our prediction, and see how accurate it is. And then we make changes to our simulation of our environment based on that new information. And that's kind of assessing our prediction error and then correcting it based on this new information from our outside world. And with anxiety, basically, she says, the metaphorical dial is stuck on allowing too much prediction error, and too many predictions are unsuccessful. With insufficient prediction, you don't know what's coming around the next corner, and life contains a lot of corners. That's classic anxiety. So then she says some other things about how there are some weakened connections in anxiety sufferers between certain key hubs in the brain, including the amygdala. These weakened connections likely translate into an anxious brain that is clumsy at crafting predictions to match the immediate circumstances and that fails to learn effectively from experience. You might predict threats needlessly or create uncertainty by predicting imprecisely or not at all. And then just one more thing. She says, this leaves you open to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of prediction error that you can't resolve. And uncertainty is more unpleasant and arousing than assured harm because if the future is a mystery, you can't be prepared for it.
Yeah. And like, so that's just making me think, like, when I, walk into a room and I assume my boyfriend's in a different room and he's just like sitting on a couch or whatever, and I get scared because he's sitting on the couch, I've falsely predicted that he shouldn't be on the couch. So that kind of gets me thinking, like, are we choosing to make these predictions of like, okay, he shouldn't be on this couch?
It's not a conscious choice.
No way. But can we make it conscious? Like, could we, like, if I just go, okay, I don't know where he is, I'm making an assumption of where he is. But if I remove those assumptions of where he is, I'm going to try that.
I mean, you can try it. And I think that like this, I think this is what I was saying before the recording, that basically with my anxiety, it's not that my predictions of the future are not necessarily based on anything. They might be based on 2 experiences I've had in the past, but say I've had 100 total experiences and 2 of them are magnified in my mind and like stand out as maybe more likely and or just more threatening, something that's more severe to try to prepare for if possible, then I will be focused on those 2 things instead of the other 98 to make a more accurate prediction of like the likelihood and the severity of this thing happening and whether it's worth my time and energy to prepare for those 2 the scenario that is based on those 2 previous experiences. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And like our body's just trying to protect ourselves, right? Like I like to try and think of it from that point of view of, okay, my body is trying to protect me from this situation happening again, and that's why it's doing this. And kind of just telling myself, I'm fine. Like I am in my house and I'm okay. 99.9% of the time, I will be okay in here. And right. I'd like to go forward with that than the 0.1% possibility of an intruder or whatever.
I mean, it's definitely possible to change or rewire the way that we expect the world to work. I think it is a lot more complicated than just I'm going to change, like just consciously change my cognitive predictions about the world in some way. There's, a lot of work that people do around trauma and sort of regulating the nervous system or re-regulating it after a traumatic experience or experiences is like really working on like the physical side of things. The sort of somatic experiences or somatic experiencing is a type of therapy modality to essentially rewire the way that our body reacts to certain stimuli. So I think you can go at it from the cognitive point of view and the somatic point of view, those approaches rather than points of view. And that's probably going to be at least more likely to be effective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I'm working with an osteo and she's helping me to release the stuff that my body has held over my lifetime. So it's a lot of work but I leave there a little bit lighter each time, which is really great. So should I explain the
Yes, please do.
that I found?
I would love to hear the definition you found.
Yeah. So I found it, I went on Attitude Mag and I wrote in anxiety because this is kind of where our population tends to go. There's an article called "What is Generalized Anxiety Disorder?" And in this article, they describe anxiety as a disorder that is characterized by baseless, irrational worry or fear that is persistent enough to interfere with state of mind, daily activities, and personal relationships. And they go on to explain that common anxiety disorders include generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. And I just want to mention that I'm not sure that my anxiety is always irrational worry or fear. And I guess it's because of those perceptions that Sam was talking about. It's based on a reality that I've experienced. So how can that be irrational?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I will admit to catastrophizing certain events and perceiving situations as black and white, and that adds to my anxiety.
You know, I learned something interesting the other day, and maybe most people know this, but I didn't. But because I have OCD, and I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, but I'm not sure how much that fits anymore, nor does my psych know how much that fits anymore. OCD is more the thing for me. And I think of OCD as, their obsessions and their compulsions. And I thought of rumination as an obsession. Like, clearly that's an obsession. You're going over and over and over something. But actually, I found some research from, I think his name's Michael Greenberg, Dr. Michael Greenberg, who said that rumination is actually a compulsion. It is compulsive problem solving. And that my thought on that is that because the rumination, say your rumination is about like it fits into catastrophizing. So like thinking of the worst possible outcome, right? There is a rational purpose to doing that usually, right? It is to prepare, like, oh, how would this feel? What would I do? What would my friend do? What would my partner do? What would happen to me? To like, that's kind of exploring a problem, a theoretical problem.
Yeah.
And like that is rational in the sense that like if it's likely and you can prepare for it, then that makes sense. But for a lot of like anxiety with rumination and catastrophizing, it's not necessarily very likely. And also you can't necessarily prepare for it either.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the key part for like, when you have anxiety and ADHD, you have to kind of be aware that this worrying is stimulating and our brain is looking for stimulation. So this rumination is stimulating, you're entertaining your brain. And when you're trying to prepare yourself by kind of going through the process, you have to be careful that you're not just taking yourself down into this big rabbit hole because you're like, oh, stimulation, bing, 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 and kind of bring yourself back up. And what I like to do is give myself something else that's stimulating to focus on, and kind of like remind myself, you know what, I would rather be doing this fun thing than worrying and draining my energy. And like this is going to sound so big, but essentially like taking pleasure out of the life that I want to live. Like I could spend more time living how I want to live versus going down this rabbit hole. And it's not fun to be there.
Yeah, I love what you just said. Like that's such an important piece with ADHD, that a lot of times our intrusive thoughts, ruminations, catastrophizing, like we tend to engage in it because our brains seek stimulation. We unconsciously seek stimulation all the time. And you said like you find something else that is stimulating instead. And I think a lot of the sort of strategy or strategizing language around that would call it like, oh, that's distracting yourself. Not necessarily in a bad way, but like, oh, it can be a good distraction. To me, that's redirecting yourself, not merely distracting. It is consciously redirecting where your attention and energy goes. And I love that you are able to do that. I am wondering, how do you know when it's time to do that? And how can you choose what to redirect your attention towards if you are in this anxious spot?
Big question.
Yeah, sorry.
It really depends how deep I am into the anxiety, and just like how well I've been taking care of myself. But if I'm in a good place, I can just feel the discomfort in my body. I can feel that I'm starting to get overwhelmed, and I realize that I don't want to be there. I don't want to be in that place. So I take myself on a walk. And one of my clients describes this as pattern interrupting. So she notices that she doesn't want to be there. This is not a good place. And she pattern interrupts. And so she takes herself on a walk. And so what I do is I also take myself on a walk. I call somebody. The best thing for me is to engage in a conversation, because it totally pulls me out of where I am. Like I say, my boyfriend drives me crazy. I say, tell me a story. He's like, I don't want to tell you a story.
Is he good at telling stories?
Yes. He's a writer. He's a good storyteller. Anyways, but it's really just like pulling me out of my head, because we can go into these dark circles, and the sooner you can catch yourself in pattern interrupt, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I wrote down pattern interrupt. I've heard that term so many times before, but I always forget it. And it's such a great description of that. And I guess it's just doing the work to recognize, okay, what are the signals I'm getting from my body that I've slipped into this pattern, or I'm about to slip into it.
Yeah. And I think I think it was like a year ago, I did a CBT anxiety therapy group, and I've had anxiety for as long as I can remember. And being in this group, one thing that really struck me was I didn't realize that anxiety was worry. I didn't realize that what we were doing is worrying. And as soon as I had that, I think I had a question to ask myself, is like, are you worrying? And worrying, a lot of the time, there is no end destination. It's just a current state that you're just going to be always circling.
It's not problem solving, right?
Exactly. And you're just wasting. So once I kind of figured that out, it does make it more helpful. And also something I discovered recently was with my coach, she uses hot buttons. So it's, what is your hot button? So if I'm ruminating, it's usually because it's one of my hot buttons. So
like the topic that you are ruminating about is a hot button.
Yeah. Okay. So like, one of my hot buttons is like, I'm not good enough. So I'm always having to prove that I'm good enough. So if I look deep down, it's usually my hot button. Someone has pressed my button of, you're not good enough. And that sends me into a flare up of like, how dare they, I have to prove, I have to fix this. And once I can identify that that's my hot button, I can sink into it and be like, okay, that's what this anxiety reactive mode is about. And what do I, and like I was about to say, what do I want to do about it? But usually it's nothing to do about it. It's sink in and see where I'm at.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I wonder if there isn't anything to do about it though. Like, going for a walk is doing something about it, I think, right?
Yeah, that's it. I love that actually, because in my head I'm like, fix the situation. So it's not about the situation, it's about me doing something about it for me.
Right. And if your situation is that you are worrying, then you can do something about the worry. You can, change your environment, introduce different types of stimulation into your environment so that your brain goes there instead of towards the worry.
Yeah. What about you? What do you do with your anxiety?
Good question. Yeah, I actually I go on daily walks now, sometimes more than once a day. And I find that has really helped my anxiety. It's not necessarily like a response to my anxiety. It is a response to my anxiety in like a very general way where I want to be less anxious. So I am going to go for a daily walk because that actually helps like calibrate where I am for the day. And I usually go in the mornings. So it really helps kind of set the scene for my day. It gets me outdoors. And like, I think for people with ADHD, I know that the outdoors is just incredibly restorative for us. So yeah, I do that. And I think I might have said this towards the beginning of this recording. It might've been before, but I kind of examine my thoughts and assumptions and kind of where I'm at, where I'm going, and basically remind myself that there is no certainty in life, which you'd think for an anxious brain that would be like, there's no certainty. But it's just reminding myself like that is a fact. There is no 100% certainty about everything. And kind of keeping that fact front and center for me has changed a lot of things for me because it helps redirect my attention towards that fact and away from like this sort of unconscious or automatic problem solving and trying to resolve all of these uncertainties. Because my brain just sort of thinks, oh, uncertainty is actually a likely like terrible outcome, when in fact uncertainty is also a doorway to like something amazing too.
Right. Like, when you go on a trip and you're so excited because you don't know, like, where you're going to go, but you don't know what you're going to see. You don't know what it's going to be
adventure.
like, right? It's an adventure. It's a journey. And for some reason, when we go on a trip, it's like, woohoo, uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen. And we totally embrace that. And it's very exciting. But in our day-to-day lives, it's not. And recently I've tried to sort of be like, my life is an adventure. This day is a journey. And what's it going to bring? Like, bring on the uncertainty because this is going to be fun. I've tried to do that shift. I mean, it's not easy because there's all our fear and all this stuff that comes into play. But like kind of making that shift has been really fun, looking at it as like a trip or an adventure, a journey.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really awesome. This is like a very, I don't know, not off topic, but it's a very different direction from where we were going just now. What came to mind when we were talking is that I think at some point last year, you and I were talking about how sometimes we forget to breathe. And we realize like, oh, we're breathing really shallowly or we're holding our breaths. And since I've become more cognizant of that, I notice that my anxious moments tend to correlate with when I'm holding my breath or breathing shallowly. And it's hard to say whether the anxiety leads to me holding my breath or me holding my breath leads to feeling anxious. But when I catch myself like holding my breath or breathing shallowly, I now kind of almost automatically, or with ease at least, breathe more deeply. And that often really just takes the anxiety, the physical anxiety I'm feeling, down several notches.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And while you were saying that, I was thinking of the ADHD lens of that, whereas sometimes I'm holding my breath because I want, there's something I want to say, but I know that I shouldn't interrupt. And so I'm just sitting here like just before I was just doing that because I want to say it, and I'm trying not to. And I wonder how many times in my day that happens where it's like, I have something to say, I shouldn't say it, so I'm just not going to, but instead I just hold my breath.
That had never occurred to me before. As a like that could be a reason to hold your breath. Like I've heard, or I think learned, maybe just anecdotally, that people with ADHD like some of our autonomic nervous system functions are a little bit like not normative, let's say, and so breathing can be more challenging for us. And I had sort of assumed that was part of like the nervous system condition that we have, and maybe it is to some extent, but yeah, if we have learned to certain ways to control our impulses, and like literally holding our breath is our way to ensure that we act in a socially appropriate way. Like it's like that's gonna like holding your breath, on a pretty consistent basis. When you're not conscious of it, certainly is going to like cause your body to be like, I need oxygen.
That's such a good point. And like you can't talk if you can't breathe, right?
Exactly. So yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I'm wondering, yeah, it sounds like coming up with strategies or just having alternative strategies to hold our thought in place and say it at a more appropriate time, other than like literally physically holding our breath. Yeah. Writing it down. That's a big one.
Yeah. Like I mean, I didn't write it down. That would have been helpful, right? So
you gotta remember to write it down. That's a key piece of that. But
yeah. Wow, I love how we like every time we go way over the time that we wanted to speak for.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did you set a timer? Because I forgot again. But yeah, we should probably wrap up pretty soon. But yeah, thank you. This is really, I was gonna say it's really fun, which sounds weird to say because we were talking all about anxiety, but it can be fun.
It is like, and sometimes just like saying things out loud just takes the weight off. And yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Yeah,
thank you. What did you say? Sorry.
It has been fun.
Gotta love Zoom and Wi-Fi cutting out and all these tech issues these days. You gotta laugh.
But guess what? It didn't happen. So we were super lucky today.
Yeah, I think maybe that was just human error on my part that I didn't hear what you said. And I was like, what? Yeah. But you're right. Actually, let's remember this moment so that we can have more accurate predictions in the future. Like,
ooh,
right? We didn't have really complicated tech issues today.
Celebrate these wins. I'm gonna write it on my wins. All right. I hope that everybody has a great day and isn't experiencing as much anxiety as we are, but we understand if you are.
If you are, you are not alone. And please reach out to someone. You can feel free to reach out to us. There are ways to manage it and to live a happy, fulfilling life, even with anxiety.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.